So in this section, we're going to talk about carbohydrate functions. What we're going to learn about is the main functions of carbohydrates in the body, the roles of insulin and glucagon in blood glucose regulation. We're going to compare anaerobic and aerobic metabolism. And we're going to talk about what happens to protein and fat metabolism when dietary carbohydrate is insufficient. So the main function of carbohydrates is to provide energy, but carbohydrates also play other roles in the body. Examples in the book are nerve tissue needs the sugar galactose, and in breastfeeding women, galactose combines with glucose to produce milk and sugar lactose. Monosaccharides, ribose and deoxyribose play non-energy roles as components of RNA and DNA, and which make up or contain the cell's genetic information. Ribose is also a component of the B vitamin riboflavin. Oligosaccharides, we're hearing a lot more about those. They're associated with cell membranes and they help signal information about cells. And large polysaccharides found in connective tissue can provide cushioning and lubrication. But what we're going to focus on really is getting enough glucose to the cells. Remember, as I said, glucose is an important fuel for the body cells. Many body cells can use only energy source. Their only energy source is glucose. But some can use other energy sources, but the brain cells, red blood cells, and a few others have to have glucose to stay alive. So in order to provide a steady supply of glucose, the concentration of glucose in the blood is regulated by the liver and the hormones secreted by the pancreas. The two hormones involved are insulin and glucagon, and our goal is to keep our fasting blood glucose between the 70 and 110 range. So for those of you in healthcare or know someone that is diabetic, or when you get your labs drawn and you see your blood glucose level, the normal range is 70 to 110. So what is insulin versus glucagon? So insulin, if we have an increase in blood glucose, like after a meal, this is the normal body's function. Our body secretes insulin from the pancreas, which causes glucose to be taken into cells and out of the bloodstream, decreases the blood glucose level, and keeps our blood glucose between that 70 and 110 range. If our blood glucose is low, like after all night sleep or we've skipped breakfast, glucagon is secreted from the pancreas and glucose is released from the liver, and this increases our blood glucose to keep us in that 70 and 110 range. So here's a great picture. We're going to start from top to bottom. In this picture, our blood glucose is increased. Maybe we just ate a meal, it's 30 minutes to an hour, and afterwards our pancreas is stimulated, and we release insulin, and what it does is it causes us to store glucose as glycogen in our muscles, to cause us to store glucose as glycogen in our liver, and any excess glucose is stored as fat in fat storage cells. So if we, with any food, but consume too much and our muscles storage is full and our liver storage is full, the only place to go is for fat storage. This removes the glucose from the blood and we get back in that normal range, 70 to 110. And then if our blood glucose is low, so start from the bottom there, we have a decreased blood glucose. Their example here is several hours after a meal. I say in the morning when we wake up or if we skip breakfast. Our pancreas releases glucagon, the hormone glucagon, and this causes us to break down glycogen through glucose synthesis and provide glucose that's released in the blood to keep us from going too low. So On the right-hand side, the dashed line represents fasting blood glucose. It's measured after 8 to 12-hour overnight fast and normally maintained between 70 to 100 milligrams of glucose per 100 milliliters of blood. But if you remember that 70 to 110 range, that just gives you an idea of what's too high and what's too low. So why do we need glucose? Where does it go? What is cellular respiration? Do cells breathe? Is that what that means? No. What we're talking about is inside body cells. The reaction of cellular respiration is the split of the bonds between carbon atoms and glucose, releasing energy that's used to make ATP. And if you remember from biology courses, the ATP is used to power the energy requiring processes in the body. So what this basically shows is in step 1, glycolysis, which takes place and the cell splits glucose into 3 smaller molecules. This releases some high energy electrons and produces a small amount of ATP. And what you really need to know here, and we're going to show you on the next slide, so you can see steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can read about that in the book, but the goal of cellular respiration, or how glucose or carbohydrates provide energy, is through the production of ATP. And in this picture, it's anaerobic, and we're going to talk about aerobic versus anaerobic. So aerobic means it requires the oxygen. So here we see the glucose with 6 carbons broken down by glycolysis in anaerobic without oxygen. We can see, go all the way to the bottom right, without oxygen, we see that we don't get a lot of ATP or a lot of energy. But what happens is, with oxygen, carbohydrate metabolism produces a lot of energy. And that's why we say the process of glucose as a source of energy, we get more energy from the breakdown with aerobic metabolism with all of that 32 to 36 ATP per glucose. So what about ketones? And we're going to talk more about this as we go, but a lot of people on low carbohydrate diets, or if you know someone that's diabetic, people might have to measure the ketones or ketone bodies in their urine. But let's talk about ketones. Ketones or ketone bodies are acidic molecules produced by fat breakdown when carbohydrates are not available. So a diabetic or someone that is not producing insulin, which is what diabetes is, and we're going to talk more about that, don't have the carbohydrates or the glucose available to the cells. And we've got to have carbohydrates, we know. The heart, muscle, and kidneys can use ketones for energy, but the brain, we talked about, needs glucose. So, but after a few days, we can use ketones. So ketone bodies are byproduct of fat breakdown when carbohydrates aren't available that the body can use for energy. And they're produced with starvation, people that are starving, people on low carbohydrate diets, and diabetes. The problem with these ketones is they're acidic, and ketosis can occur. This is increased ketones in the blood, and it can lead to ketoacidosis, which is when your blood is too acidic, and it can lead to comas or death. So I said we were going to talk about a little bit about what happens with limited carbohydrate and protein breakdown, and limited carbohydrate and fat breakdown. So glucose is an essential fuel for the brain and the red blood cells, we said. If it's not available, We can break down protein. We don't want to. Protein, I always say, is very nutritious. Why do we want to break down our protein or muscles in our body to produce glucose? It's not a good thing. We need our protein in our stores in our body for other things, but if glucose is not available, we can break down our protein, and it takes away from the use of amino acids to form body proteins, and they won't be available to do their job. So we say that carbohydrates are protein sparing. We need sufficient dietary carbohydrates to ensure that we don't break down our own proteins, our own muscle mass, and we call protein sparing. What about limiting carbohydrates? Does it interfere with fat breakdown? So most of our energy storage in the body, and we're going to talk about that when we get to the fat chapter, is stored as fats, fatty acids. If there's not enough carbohydrates, like on a low-carb diet or with starvation or diabetes, we can break down fatty acids to use them for energy when carbs are in short supply. And but we do form those ketone bodies, and too much, as I said, can cause the ketosis. And severe ketosis can occur with untreated diabetes because the blood is so acidic and disrupted, and it can cause coma or death.